Welcome to this episode of the PA System. So on tonight's show, we're taking a little bit different approach because I've got someone here that I think is really going to help us understand a little bit more about what's going on in the lives of many children around the world and what's being done. So I would love to welcome to the show tonight, Chris Russell of Destiny Rescue. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Yeah,
thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
So great to have you. And my co-host, Christopher Rausch, is joining us as well. Thank you for being with us, Christopher.
What's up, beautiful people? It's always great to be here with you guys.
Yeah, so great to be with you as well. So, Chris, I mean, this is such an important conversation. And I really want to just kind of get a framework for this so people have an understanding for who you are and who Destiny Rescue is and what you're doing through Destiny Rescue. So just talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah. So my name is Chris Russell, and I'm the Director of Engagement for Destiny Rescue. We're an international nonprofit organization, and our primary focus is rescuing underage girls out of sex trafficking situations. So here's, let's take a minute and look at kind of the 30,000 foot view of this. Human trafficking right now is the fastest growing criminal activity in the world. Wow. So just to talk about the money that it makes, let's say, I'm a huge football fan. I'm from Pittsburgh. Steelers, my boys. They stink this year, but they're still my boys. But the NFL is by far our most profitable sport here in the US, right? By far, they make money hand over fist. The NFL makes a profit of about $8 billion a year, right? Baseball, basketball, football, and hockey combined make about $30 billion a year. Human trafficking makes over $150 billion a year. It makes more money than illegal drugs and firearms now. And it makes sense when you stop to think about it, because let's say you own a gun, you sell a gun, you make a profit once, but you own a girl, you may be selling her thousands and thousands of times. So this is a massive issue. And our primary focus is underage girls. It's not going to be a surprise to anyone that about 97 to 98% of victims of sex trafficking are female. And we know that right now there are well over 1 million children being sex trafficked around the world. So it's happening everywhere. It doesn't happen equally everywhere. They estimate, like if you're looking at a world map, they estimate of the 1 million kids being sex trafficked, almost 73% of that is in Southeast Asia. It is just rampant in Southeast Asia. There's a lower view of women. There's less opportunity for the kinds of jobs that young women can have in those countries. There's an added pressure on taking care of their parents as they get older. So it creates this horrible, perfect storm for trafficking at massive levels. But it obviously certainly happens here in the US. It happens in every state in our country. But yeah, it's just a massive, massive issue. And we just can't stick our heads in the sand on this. It's going to require all of us to step up and do our part.
Yeah, no doubt. And like you said, that just the numbers are astronomical. I know I heard a story recently about just this one particular village, and I don't want to even try to remember the exact location of it, but where there was something like 140 child brothels just in this one village, and the government is aware of this, right? And this is just allowed to continue. So I think that for us to really have an understanding of that is so important, because it's kind of like that old saying that if you see a wrong and you do nothing about it, then you're in the wrong too. And so I feel like I really want people to kind of get the essence of this. So I wanted to actually play the video that is on your website because it actually shows some of the girls, right? And I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about this video before I play it, but it actually gives you really a sense of what some of these girls are actually going through.
Okay. And which video is this one, Pam?
This is the one right on the front page of your website.
Oh, on the website. Okay. Yeah, it's amazing how, we have. Here's a couple things that you want to know, just so you kind of understand when you see stuff on social media. Because if you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, especially, we actually now have an account on TikTok because we had a student intern that helped us get that out because none of us could figure that out. So there's a bunch of kids following. We actually have our own youth initiative called Rescue Op 120, where we have it's rescuing kids like me is the tagline for that, and we have elementary, middle school, high school, and college kids that are all about rescuing their peers, which is just awesome. So we are the only large-scale organization in anti-trafficking that is primarily focused on children, and we're one of the very few in the world that actually has our own undercover agents. So when you see videos of that, what happens is there's a lot of anti-trafficking groups in the world. They gather intel, they hand it off to the local police, hoping the police will do something about it. But the reality is, the local police, they're getting paid under the table to turn the other way. So nothing ends up happening about that. And you see that here in the US too. You see they're kind of vigilantes in a sense that they have the right heart. They want to do stuff where they're trying to set kids up, or they're trying to pretend like they're an underage girl and they're communicating with a guy and they do a setup to meet in person. And then they show up and they've got the camera rolling and they're thinking, hey, this is enough stuff to give to the police. Well, if you don't gather the evidence in the way that our courts accept it, probable cause, search warrants, all that kind of stuff, it's going to immediately be tossed from any court of law here in the US. So you have people who have the best of intentions, but you still have to go about it the right way to be able to do that. So we have what's called MOUs, memorandums of understanding. That's in place with each government that we're in. So right now we're doing operations in 13 different countries. Our goal is to be in 30 by the end of 2030. And that MOU spells out what we can and what we can't do. But that MOU allows our guys to go in with the hidden body cameras on them so that we can gather evidence against kids that are hidden and, are being trapped and used in brothels and everything. So that way, when we do those kinds of things, we can rescue the girls, but we also have legal evidence against the traffickers and the businesses so that we can rescue the kids, but then we can prosecute those traffickers to the fullest extent of the law. So when you're seeing, kids in these videos that we have, just, realize that these are kids that are in desperate situations, but together, you and I get to bring hope and change those futures.
Yeah, and I really want to talk more about that, but I do want people to see this video first. So if you give me just a moment, I'm going to pull this up and allow this to play for everyone because I honestly, I watched this and it was all I could do, not just break down. It's shocking to me, right? And not that we don't know this, but it's just shocking to me to actually watch these things go on. So, and if you're watching, bear with me as I help pull this up for everyone to see because sometimes my technology cooperates and sometimes it doesn't. So
I think that's the same for all of us.
We're gonna hope for the best on this one.
You're gonna be fine, Pam. You're gonna do it. I got faith in you.
All right, so
you
here
can
we
do
go.
Cáiเราเจอครับที่เราเจอตาคือแบบตาก็โศกเศร้าแต่ว่าไม่มีความสุขในจุดนี้กลัวแบบว่าเราจะทำไม่ดีกับเขาแต่ถ้าสุดท้ายไม่อยากให้ลูกค้าแตะเนื้อต้องตัวมานี้ครับครั้งเรามองว่าเราก็หมั่นไส้อยู่นะประมาณว่าเหมือนกับน้องเราคนหนึ่งครับเนาะที่
Everything body job set at that 1,500 baht
คือในสายตาและความคิดของเจ้าของร้านวันนี้ครับเนาะคือเขาต้องการแค่ว่าเด็กคนนี้มาทำงานต้องหาเงินให้ตัวอะไรสักหน่อยคือให้ลูกค้าให้เขา
500 baht yeah we have private but massage also
แววตาของนี่คือจะจ้องที่ศิริระร่างกายครับเนาะเช่นพูดได้นะครับเนาะเช่น หน้าอกประมาณนี้นะหน้าอก
Whole body? You leave me happy?
Yeah, you're happy
I'll be
for
happy.
life.
Okay.
คือเหมือนหื่นเหมือนอะไรอะต้องการแบบเข้ามาปุ๊บต้องการแบบจะกอดเด็กประมาณนี้แต่ในจุดลึกที่จะสัมผัสว่าเด็กมองตัวเองว่าไร้ค่าหรือว่าเป็นแค่ร่างกายหรือว่าไม่สำคัญต่อชีวิตเขาอย่างนี้นะครับเนาะในมุมมองของลูกค้าทั่วไปแค่มองว่า
Wow, that was powerful, Chris. Jeez.
Yeah, it really is. And the fact that you guys are doing what you're doing is so extraordinary to me. And the difference it's making in these children's lives is just, I mean, almost hard to comprehend. So talk to us about that. Tell us about the transformations that are happening in these children's lives because of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's the fun part. Hey, let me give you one quick update. I just saw this about an hour ago. So every week I get a weekly report that tells us how many rescues were reported that week. And they're always a couple weeks behind because we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and verifying our information on each of these kids before we go public with our teams on these things. So it'll do a breakdown of the gender, of the age, which country they were rescued in, what type of rescue it was, all that statistic wise. We keep close track of that. So we're able to report with integrity that to our donors and our supporters. But as of the weekend, the last report I got was the week ending November 12th, we have passed 3,000 rescues this year.
Wow.
So
Well,
we're super
congratulations
excited
for
about
that.
that. That's a lot of lives being transformed. So, you know, there's a lot more that we want to get to, and we've got to be reminded we need to keep that in front of us, but we want to celebrate along the way too for the many kids that have been rescued. So I actually got to spend time a few months back. I was in Africa for 3 weeks and got to visit 4 of our projects in 3 different countries. So I got to spend time with probably about 150 rescued girls. And what was really cool was the countries we were in, they used to be British colonies, so they speak British English. The kids know that. So you get to sit and hear the stories straight from the girls. You don't have to have a translator for that. So I just absolutely love that. So what's happening is, you know, it doesn't do us any good to set kids free if we don't make sure they get to stay free for the long haul. So we're very much a holistic ministry in that. Yes, we're excited about that. We're one of the few, you know, as far as nobody's doing rescue work on the scale that we're doing it, but we don't want to just sit in that arena. We want to make sure that we're setting these kids up for success for the long haul. So we partner with a lot of different organizations and ministries around the world as well to help us do that. So when we go in, you know, one of the places we went to, it was a ministry that had been in that area for about 25 years. And it was basically an orphanage. They could hold about 70 kids. That was their max capacity. So kids who didn't have food, didn't have a safe place to stay, could go to this place. Well, what we do is we have a model that's called community care, because we don't want any more kids in any kind of like an orphanage situation than necessary. Kids get institutionalized, they get dependent on us, they get used to a standard of living that's not sustainable for the long haul. So we want them in as much of a normal family environment as we possibly can get them. So it could be that we support, if it's safe to go back to the family, that's another thing we have to do our due diligence on, because they estimate about 40% of victims of trafficking, it starts with a family member. So we have to do our due diligence to make sure it's a safe place for the girl to be able to go back to. So if it is, then it may be that the girl is able to stay with the family and we help financially support while she goes through our job training program. It could be that it's an older sibling. Like it could be, say we get a 12-year-old kid that we rescue. She's not old enough to enter into the job force. So, but maybe she's got a 17 or 18-year-old brother or sister that is, and we're able to enroll that sibling into our job training program while supporting the family so that he or she can support the family for the long haul. But what was really awesome about it is this ministry that we partnered with, what we were able to do in creating a partnership was we extended that ministry. So three primary areas. We brought in people who are field agents. So they're the ones that become aware of girls who are selling themselves. So that was one of the unique things in Africa we're finding. Like Southeast Asia, we deal with a lot of traffickers in Southeast Asia and some other countries. In Africa, the desperation level is so bad, girls are selling themselves just so they can eat that day. So in a lot of cases, there's not even a trafficker involved. So these field agents, they create this network of informants, and that may be just local business leaders, people from their church, whatever that might be, that are keeping an eye out. And when they become aware of a girl who's selling themselves, they let the field agents know, and the field agents are able to go out, interview the girls, verify those stories, get contact information, and pretty quickly determine whether or not they qualify to get into our program. So that is allowing us to rescue kids at a massive rate, because a number of times, just by getting them even into a food program, just by getting them into that, many of the girls never have to be abused again, simply by providing enough food for them to eat on a daily basis. Jeez. So that ministry, so the field agents, and then we have our own aftercare program. It's called the Empower program, and it helps kids deal with the trauma that they've been through. And we are a faith-based organization, and they learn a lot about the power of forgiveness as well in that. But it's a powerful community event that we're opening up more and more just to trauma, like in Africa, the wars and all those kind of battles and people killed and all that stuff that's happened in Africa. There's a lot of people that have grown up in some form of trauma. And we're just finding that this Empower program is actually speaking to thousands and thousands of them and really meeting them where they're at. So that's a really exciting thing. So we add staff for that purpose, and we train them on that. And then we also add what we call TOJ agents as well. So TOJ is training on the job. So this part was really exciting because, again, we want to set up kids for long-term success. So what does that look like? So let's say, Pam, when we were in Africa, the three primary things the girls wanted to do when we asked them what to do: hair salon, sewing, and catering. Those were the three big ones that they wanted to do. So what we do is we'll go into the community and we find like-minded business leaders who operate in those three areas. So let's say, Chris, let's say you own a catering business. All right. So the deal that you and I have as ministry partners is you're going to take 5 of my girls and you're going to teach them everything you know about the catering business. And in return, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay their full salary for 2 months. And then I'm going to pay 2/3 for 2 months and 1/3 for 2 months. At the end of 6 months, these girls are fully trained and ready to go. If you have openings, you can hire them because you know what you got. And if you don't, other people who know you know that you train them, and they're going to hire those girls. So in a very short period of time, we're taking kids who have been used and abused, and within just a couple months, you're seeing massive transformation in their lives. We went into one place, it was a hair salon, and one of the ladies was there, and she called one of the girls over, and she just started doting on this girl about, man, she comes every day, she works hard. After 3 months, she has already earned a chair in my salon. And man, you could have stuck a banana in that girl's mouth and her smile wouldn't have gotten any bigger. Like she was just, you could just see this joy and life in her. And this was a girl that just 3 months earlier, her daily routine was to get up and figure out how she was going to get abused again so that she could eat and survive one more day. And that's what people, I don't think we get here in the US, that, yeah, obviously, I don't want to make light of anything with people who experience hunger, who suffer and stuff like that. But for the most part, most of us aren't worried about, are we going to get to eat over the next couple of days? That's not a major issue for many of us. And we're already talking about, I had been looking forward to Thanksgiving, and now I'm looking forward to Christmas and traveling and seeing family and doing this and doing that. When you're in extreme poverty, none of that exists.
No.
You're not looking forward to Christmas. You're not looking forward to something next week. You're not looking forward to a trip. Like, all you do is you get up and go, what am I going to do to survive another day?
Yeah.
And then you figure it out. They get abused. they get food, they live another day, and they get up the next day, and it happens all over again for them.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the countries we were in, one of the ministries we worked with works in one of the biggest slums in that country. And we walked through the slum that morning because we had our international video person that does a lot of the videos like we just saw. And we wanted to capture some of these girls' stories who had just come into our care. And while we were walking into the slum, our local field agents, because you're walking in, they're looking in your direction, but they're looking through you. It's just it's hollow. Look, the eyes are just so hollow. And the field agent said, most of these people are just simply waiting to die.
Yeah.
And we went and we sat down with 3 of these girls to capture their stories. And just in the short time we sat down with those 3 girls to capture their stories, more than 60 other girls lined up, hoping that they would be able to get some help too.
Wow.
So
Chills.
And we went from that in the morning, just the contrast. We went from that in the morning. The afternoon, we went to one of our sites where at that time we have about 45 girls that had been rescued. And now we're already up over 80 in that location. And they live there and they do their training in those 3 areas, the sewing, salon, and catering. And after that heavy morning, we get there and I open up the van door and the first thing I hear is joyful laughter.
Yeah.
And the next 3 hours, we just spent time playing games and hearing stories, watching them do sewing. I have one girl that she came up to me with her teacher and the teacher showed her how to measure, take my measurements and everything. 3 hours later, she came back and had a full shirt, collar, pocket, buttons, everything for me.
Wow, that's tremendous.
It was gorgeous.
But
so Chris, see that contrast of this is the situation that we saw that morning that basically many of those girls had just been in, and you just would never know it. Of course, there's going to be, there's trauma and there's the counseling that's ongoing and everything, but to be able to see already the transformation in those girls that lived in that desperation and now they are so full of hope and they know they have amazing futures in front of them. That's about as good as it gets.
Incredible.
So Chris, I have a couple questions for you. Yeah. Number one, how did you get started in this? And number two, you mentioned earlier on in the broadcast about, we got some people out there trying to take matters into their own hands and try to go out there and break up some of these rings. What are recommendations? How did you get started? And what are some recommendations that people can do to start to be a part of the solution in this particular situation? I know I've got friends. I don't know if you know Jason Cisneros with CERT Ministries. He's in that game as well. But how did you get started in this? And what are some recommendations for the general public to do if they see something like this or they want to get involved, they want to become a part of ending the trafficking?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. Great questions. I've been a pastor for 23 years. And back in 2015, I brought Destiny Rescue into our church family. And it was just a game changer for our church, for people to realize there really is a tangible way that we can partner with an organization to help set kids free. And so that lit a fire in me that ultimately ended up, 2017, I was asked in that role as the lead pastor still to be on the U.S. board for Destiny Rescue. And in 2019, I made the transition over to Destiny Rescue full-time. So February, I'll have been full-time for 4 years with Destiny Rescue. But it was just something that got such a grip on me, and to realize, oh my gosh, there's so much tangible things that we can do to be in this fight. That really fired me up. And the idea of being able to go and help other people connect to that's what lights my fire on a daily basis. So here's the deal. So just so people are aware, that MOU I mentioned earlier, that memorandum of understanding that you have to have in a country, at this point, the U.S. has not given that to any organization. So we are not allowed to do undercover operations here in the U.S. at this point. We can do a ton of awareness, and I have no doubt that our awareness efforts have protected kids from getting caught up into sex trafficking. So we go into schools, like I mentioned earlier, the rescueop120.com. If people go to that, if they're in charge of any kind of groups that work with kids, whether it's at school, youth groups, clubs, whatever that might be, a great resource to find out, like, how do we talk to our kids and how do we activate them to do something to set their peers free. That's really exciting. But a number of us go into schools and do educational pieces. I go into schools and I talk to them about how traffickers think and how they recruit on social media, because a lot of people, we've seen the Taken movies. So the whole kidnapping thing, that's, we've seen that. Yeah. Kidnapping happens with trafficking, but it's not by any means a huge percentage of it. when it comes to trafficking, it's really about grooming and vulnerabilities. Traffickers are looking to groom kids. So what they're looking on, especially here in the US, is social media. So as parents, grandparents, siblings, whatever that is, we have to be in conversation with our kids and grandkids about what they're doing online. You know, these kids are growing up in a generation where it's all about the likes and the follows, and they're not discerning who are those people in that circle of influence that are you're connecting to on social media. And I put my dad hat on. I've got 4 kids. I've got a son that's 23, and my wife and I adopted 3 girls 5 years ago. They're 19, 15, and 9. And I talk about, you know, when we got them, yeah, the oldest one was 14 and had been through a lot of stuff. And she really connected with this whole ministry with Destiny Rescue because she knew that the average girl that we rescued was 15 years old. So right around her age. And, you know, when she started going and hearing me speak, she wanted to start going along with me and being at the events and helping to work the table. And we have another video I'd encourage, maybe we can share the link for it. It's the red shoes video. And it's Tony. He goes downstairs in this brothel and there's these dugout rooms. And the only thing in the hallway is this little pair of red high heel shoes that a girl had kicked off before she got taken in to get abused. And it's a powerful, about a 4-minute video. Without me saying anything, my 15-year-old girl started showing up at events with me wearing a black dress and red high heels.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That still gets me choked up. That's been 4 years, and it's
so
still
powerful.
But our kids can understand this.
Right.
Our kid, you know, as much as they're brought up in a me culture, this pushes them out of that comfort zone to learn about this and to get engaged with this and to realize there is so much bigger of a world to be a part of than your own little bubble. It's a powerful thing to get our kids and grandkids involved with this. It really is.
It's so true. It's so true. So what are we, I mean, here domestically in the United States, I mean, we can't do a lot about what's going on in other countries, but here domestically in the United States, what are some things that our government or our local authorities are doing to bring this to an end or to diminish it, you know, considering how big of a problem it is?
Yeah. And you know, there's a lot of good resources. Again, we don't have a seat at the table for US stuff. Everything undercover wise, operational wise has to be led by state and federal at this point. We're trusting that at some point we're going to be able to get an MOU in place. There are a number of resources. You know, there's a national human trafficking hotline. It's 1-888-3737-888. And when you call that, you know, the saying is, if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
So talk to someone. When I go into the schools, I make sure part of my presentation is finding out who are the people they need to talk to, whether it's the resource officer at that school or one of the counselors. We always make sure we let people know this is who you talk to if you see something. And I also share with the kids, I've got a whole list of, you know, red flag behaviors that we talk about with changes in behavior in your friends and what's going on. And all of a sudden they've got all this really nice stuff, or they're dating a guy that's a lot older or seems controlling, or, you know, there's just kind of a list you can kind of go through and help people to realize that if you're seeing something, it doesn't necessarily mean it definitely is a trafficking situation, but it could be, and it's worth having a conversation. So that see something, say something is huge. And if you call the trafficking hotline, that triggers whatever is going on in your state, whatever authorities, you know, whatever groups are in charge of that in each individual state, it triggers those into motion to be able to investigate that particular case, what's going on. So there's a lot of good stuff going on with that, but it's up to us to keep our eyes open and to be looking out for that. But we really need to have the conversations with our kids. Because again, you know, like I have a 9-year-old, and, you know, I found out a couple of years ago when she's 7 playing video games, even the video games for little kids now have chat features on them. There are traffickers all over those chat features. And for us to have that conversation with our daughters, and I talk to my kids about social media, and I, you know, when I'm talking at high schools, I put my dad hat on and I talk to the girls about what kinds of pictures they're posting and what kind of message that sends to traffickers. And I talk to boys about pornography and that slippery slope of going, hey, you kind of think this and this, but this is what it can lead to. You know, like these guys that are abusing 12-year-old girls didn't just wake up one day and be like, hey, I want to abuse a 12-year-old girl. A lot of that's tied into pornography. So having those hard conversations is really important. I go around to a lot of men's groups and talk about that, because it's a slippery slope that people think, it's not a big deal. But then this doesn't really do it. So you got to push the boundary, something a little harder and then a little harder. And you push it. And what you end up with is guys who are addicted to pornography. And eventually the idea of having sex with a 12-year-old girl doesn't seem like a big deal, because it's just been this slow fade of you just keep stretching the boundaries a little bit more of what's acceptable. And that's what it leads to eventually.
I think this is so important too for people to kind of understand that, because recently I heard a conversation around even this word pedophilia, where now, while you can't use the word pedophilia, you have to use minor attracted. Like somehow we have to protect people who are, have pedophilia as an inclination. And so I think that there's something to this idea that if we don't really understand the mindset behind some of these things, and that there's this very active sort of endeavor to bring our children into this over sexualized environment that, they're not in any way prepared for.
Right.
So that those boundaries are so blurry for them that they don't even know if someone's doing something inappropriate anymore, right? I mean, we're sending them to school now and they're having to talk about sex in the classroom. Like, I mean, so many of these things that people are sort of just like not really, they're just kind of taking it for granted, like, oh, well, that's just part of what's going on now. And it's like, no, stop and think about what that actually really means for your child, and especially developmentally. But also in terms of how it puts them at risk. And then also to remember that it's not just men, we've got a lot of women out there that are doing these same things to kids.
Right.
And for kids to have an awareness around some of these things.
Yeah. And unfortunately, our culture isn't doing us any favors in this area, because we are sugarcoating stuff. And I'm not really all into the PC stuff, to be honest with you. So like, especially with what I do, I don't care about like you call this or what, for me, a spade's a spade. And for me, we live in a country that I'm involved in a world where over 1 million kids are being sexually abused. Like literally right now, if we traveled, even like I could take you over to Phnom Penh in Cambodia. I could take you down the red light district there. In one city block, we're going to find at least a dozen underage girls who are getting used and abused. If we're the partying type, we're not going to go out in the US here and find a 15-year-old girl working in a bar. That's not going to happen. We've got the laws against it. We've got the means we got the teeth to those laws to enforce that. They have the laws there, but they don't have the resources to enforce them at all. So girls just lie about their age. So they're just hiding in plain sight. But we could easily go there just one city block and find, a dozen kids who are being used. And meanwhile, here in the US, you've got this initiative where you've got women who are wanting to be able to have the right. It's my body. If it's my business, then I can use my body for business purposes, and I want the right to be, and for me, that to be honest, that just churns my stomach when I think that people get to a place of devaluing themselves so much that they would be okay to be treated like that. And not only just be okay or just deal with being treated that way, but to actually advocate for it to be legalized for that to happen. Like that. Yeah. There's a lot of things in this world I can't wrap my head around on. That's
and I think that gets us into almost a whole other conversation around, how much of that comes out of their own trauma and were they sexually abused as a child and all of those sorts of things too, which in many cases they were, but I think that what really is just at the forefront, I guess, of my attention recently around this whole topic is just how it's become so pervasive and so much of what our kids are exposed to in our society today. And so to try to help them understand, as parents, as aunts, uncles, grandparents, whatever the case may be, just to help them to understand like what some of the risks are, even though, sure, they're not in necessarily a country where this is happening just out in the open in front of everyone. It's becoming more and more acceptable for kids to be exposed to, you name it. I mean, really, whatever someone decides it's okay for them to be exposed to, they'll go ahead and expose them to it. And then we're supposed to be convinced of why this is acceptable for whatever reason. And
and you think about, again, I've got a 15-year-old girl, and as hopefully good parents do, we monitor what she's allowed to watch and not allowed to watch. And she'll say, hey, I want to watch this show. It's PG-13. Is it okay? And we're like, well, let's look at it. We want to know why it's rated, PG-13. And I am amazed at how much the boundary has been pushed for PG-13 now.
Oh yeah.
And even nudity stuff for that can be I'm like, how is that? How can you possibly rate that PG-13? And that's somehow acceptable in that range now. We just keep moving that marker to sexualize our kids at such young ages. And like you said, Pam, they're not ready for it. They don't have the maturity for it. And especially the danger of when you get these girls who their bodies are maturing at a young age, but emotionally they're not even close to catching up with their bodies right now. But guys, with what we're taught in society and with pornography, it just objectifies females, and they're just looked at as a side of meat instead of the valuable human beings that they are. And it's not okay.
And we know the side effects. I mean, we know the side effects of this. Like the science has been done, right? The research has been done. And for how many decades, have people been going to therapists for having been sexually assaulted or molested or all these different things, right? And so it's not like we're not aware of this on some level, but I think what we don't think is that it's almost like that only happens to other people on some level is kind of our mentality, which is totally human nature, right? Like, this isn't about like we're bad parents or something. It's just our tendency to think, oh, well, that's, because we kind of don't want to face the reality or the truth. But I think that that's ultimately why we have to have these conversations, is just for us as the adults to be thinking about what do we really want for our kids? Now as kids, do we want, how do we want to try to preserve their innocence as long as we can and allow them to have a childhood, the kind of childhood they should have, versus being exposed to all these things that are just going to confuse them and make really their life harder in many ways, not easier and not better.
Yep, absolutely.
That's crazy.
I feel like you're sitting on something you want to say.
Well, I was going to say, thinking about the conversation now, what are some of the things that are on the horizon for ways to reduce this potential problem? And you talked about getting the MOU here in the United States. I mean, what are some other effective strategies that we can help, potentially as voters to get things legislated to be able to do deeper investigations and take more immediate action to curb this? Is there things on the horizon that you guys are looking to do to be able to help stop this?
I think, in any state someone lives in, it's good for them to be aware of who some of those decision makers are at the state level and find out what is in place. And because states look very different. I'm a little bit more familiar with Indiana stuff than any other state, obviously, because I live here. But, knowing that some of those key leaders and to make that, there's different issues that always come up at election. It seems like, okay, these are the three big hot button issues and stuff. Like, how do we make this a hot button issue?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
How do we as voters, how do we make enough noise that catches the ears of those decision makers at the state's levels to say, hey, this has got to be something that's part of what I run on. This has got to be part of my platform to make a difference in this, because it's not okay. And that's I think somewhere, where we've got to make some noise. They talk about the squeaky wheel. we got to step up and be the squeaky wheel and get some people's attention, because that's a big step at each state level to do that. I think, again, those conversations, I can't emphasize those enough. I had kids that came up to me after times where I've shared conversations that they had going on social media. And I read through those and like red flags everywhere, because again, these traffickers are looking for vulnerability. So the conversations of how kids present themselves on social media is vitally important to helping them stay safe, because traffickers are looking for sad, lonely, suicidal, depressed, kids who have a horrible relationship with their parents, and then they're creating these fake accounts and pretending to be that sympathetic ear for these kids. And the kids need to know, don't use social media as the means of getting that affirmation that you need to have your circle, your tribe of people that you go to for that. Don't go to social media for that kind of stuff. Like you've got to be, they've just got to be wiser now. Unfortunately, they shouldn't have to worry about that stuff, but it's the reality. So they're going to have to.
Yeah,
So
parents definitely have to take a more active role. I mean, we just literally here, probably 10 minutes away from me, we just had, I don't know if you guys saw the news, but there was a family of 3 that were killed recently because the teenage girl got catfished, and the guy came out. He was ex police officer from New York, I think, came out here and killed the family, and then took the girl to Palm Springs, and then ultimately killed himself when the police found his vehicle. So I mean, again, the parents have to be they have to be taken care of and taking responsibility for what's going on in their kids' lives. All of a sudden just like, oh wow, this is going on. I mean, come on, like you're saying, like be a little bit more proactive and in your children's business, so to speak, but show it from a love and affection and a caring standpoint, to sit there and say, hey, this is what I mean, personally, my son's 6 years old, and we have those conversations, those real adult type of conversations, like here's the things to look for. Parents got to take that responsibility. But I see in society these days, it's not happening. It's heartbreaking to see what parents will let their kids do, and they don't care because they're off trying to deal with their own BS.
And I know, Pam, we're not on a parenting episode here, but like for us, like our kids, the phones are not their phones. They're our phones that they get to use. We know their passwords and we have access to them at any time.
Yeah.
And
they can't delete anything. If they delete stuff, we've got tracking software for that. Like we bring down the hammer on that. We just don't mess with that. It's just, it's too important. There's too much at stake.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And another thing that I don't think very many people are aware of, and this is especially true, I think, for single moms, especially if you're using dating websites, is that those have actually become sort of hunting grounds, right, for some of these predators who will look for single moms and try to find who's vulnerable so they can get to their kids. There's a lot of women out there that I don't really think are aware of this. And sadly, this is actually a lot more organized than you would imagine. And so this is going on, trafficking rings are using these tools now, to get access to kids. So I think, just having an awareness around that as well is super important. And that's why I feel like, we really have to have these conversations, even though they're hard conversations to have sometimes, and they're not necessarily the most fun topics for us to talk about. It's so important because there's so much at stake. And so I know we're coming up on our time here, but I'm just so grateful that you've been with us, because I feel like there's so much that we've talked about that was just really important for us to discuss. But also, I'm just really excited about the work that you guys are doing and the difference that it's making in all of these children's lives. It's just extraordinary. And I would love, for anyone who hears or sees this podcast to, just in some way, even if you can just donate $1, do something to help support this cause and give these kids another chance at life.
Okay. Pam, we got time for a 1-minute story?
Yes.
Okay. So one of our girls, her name was Mew. She was a girl that was rescued several years ago. And she was one that her family didn't make enough money. She had to get a job, went to the big city, got coerced into working at a brothel, and was used and abused every day for about 1.5 years before she got rescued. And she was at one of our Christmas parties a few years back. And, you imagine this room full of 7 to 17-year-old girls and just how rambunctious that can get, and having fun. And then the atmosphere kind of changed and got a little more serious, and they started sharing their stories. And after a little bit, Mew got up and shared her story. And when she was done, she looked at our rescue agents and our caseworkers, and she said something that motivates me every day to do what I do. She said, "Thank you for considering my life worthy enough to come and rescue."
Wow.
And that, between that and the sign on my office wall that says, "If we don't find her tonight, somebody else will." Those are 2 huge motivators for me. And all of us can do something, and all those somethings together sets a lot of kids free. So check us out.
Chris, powerful, brother. Thank you for being who you are and what you do.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for allowing me to be here.
Christopher, any closing thoughts?
No, just thank you. I mean, again, thank you for what you do, and thank you for risking, your life and your safety and everything else to go out there and make a difference in the world. I mean, that's what I'm all about, is making a positive difference in the world every single day with something we can all do, and we can all take that responsibility to be able to effectively have better communications with our kids and with our spouses and everybody else, and learn about what's going on in schools and the educators and everything else, and knowing what our kids are doing. So just thank you for doing what you're doing, and I look forward to learning more from your organization as well.
Yeah, great. So good being with you guys.
Yeah,
so great to have you. And for everyone out there listening, thank you so much for being with us this evening. And if you got something out of this, or if you would just like to support this organization and these children around the world, please do share this video out, or go to destinyrescue.org and make a contribution to them directly. So thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you here again next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.